Welcome everyone to the sixth community of practice, to as part of the Soteria project. So everyone is here that I see is part of Soteria, so no need to say more about the project. So today we will have a presentation from Mia and Milena, Seeing the Invisible, Mapping Tangible and Behavioral Barriers with the PESTEL Combi matrix. So this tool has been developed under, if I can say like that, the deliverable 2.2 in the Soteria project. And we will have the chance to have this the presentation of this tool. So in order, the agenda is quite simple. We'll have this introduction, then we'll have the presentation between 20-30 minutes, and then an open discussion and exchange between us, and a closing session. I think it's all. I let the floor to the two speakers. I don't know who start, Milena or Mia. If you also can say 2 words about you. And then the floor is yours.
Okay, my name is Mia Ebeltoft. I have my own company. I have been working in the insurance business for about 25 years, mainly representing the Norwegian insurance companies in the association. And now I work in different EU projects like this Soteria project. Next, please. Or maybe you should be, no, Milena,
Yes.
you go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Milena Nikolova. I am one of the co-founders of Behavior Smart and also the chief behavioral expert at the company. My expertise actually is away from climate. It's in the space of understanding human behavior and behavior change and placing that in the context of sustainability and climate action and understanding how we can use human psychology in order to drive change towards new socioeconomic models that align with the climate emergence. Mia, should we start?
Yeah, go ahead. Next. Okay. Well, as was mentioned, we have been looking at primarily how to use or reuse climate-related risk data and loss data, and see how this is in this setting. We are more looking at the behavior part, the social culture part, but we will also touch upon we call it the Norwegian case, which is where in Norway, working for the insurance sector, I took part in developing a new national data hub or platform where all the different insurance data was compiled together with data from national authorities, and it showed that this was hadn't been done before. So we have some expertise or experience from that we will look at. Well, that will be part of this discussion. The context here is that that within the two tasks we have been working on, I've been working on particularly the in work package 1, where we are looking at what kind of data do the insurance, the region and the municipality need to do better decisions, to make risk assessment, etc. And this is also very much linked into the EU strategy for climate adaptation, and which says if you don't have any data, you are sort of blind to understand the awareness and to make the good decisions. And this is also a requirement actually under the EU flood directive. So the part of the background here is that we have seen that these data are very often in these climate-related risk and loss data. They are fragmented and there's an inconsistent landscape. So how do you combine this data? And the data remains mainly siloed and underused. So you need to look into each public and private institutions to inform them about the value of these data, and that we need the data to decisions about climate adaptation and as I mentioned, risk management, and also it influences on the insurance design. Okay, so the background, I mentioned that the context, and how this is part of work package 1 in Soteria and also work package 2. And work package 1 is the dialogue with the different region. There's 8 different regions in Soteria that has committed themselves to be part of this research project, and we have had a lot of dialogue with the regions to understand their needs and map their use or lack of data, etc. And then under the work package 2, which is part of D22, mentioned here, the driver and barriers, we have looked at this in a PESTEL from a PESTEL view, and I will tell you what PESTEL is on the next slide or further down. Yeah, okay. So the key barriers and drivers in dialogue with the region, we found that this, what are the drivers? And it's mainly you have to look at the institutional responsibility at the authorities. And we're not talking about the national authorities. They have to register and to report on data to Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and there's climate adaptations within the Paris Agreement that they have to report on. So they both need also data, but more on a national level. But when we look at region and particularly cities and municipalities, they need granular data, and that is then you're getting into some sort of challenges. So they were very clear they needed granular data, and they wanted to explore. They know more or less who has what data on national level, but again, they needed it on a granular level. And we saw that where insurance penetration is very high, like in the Nordic countries, where almost 99% of the population is actually buying property insurance. They have a lot of good data that coming from damages. So they have damage and loss data, which shows the what happened. Was it a flooding? What kind of hazard? Where did it happen? So down to address, they have data on the cost of this, etc. So here the question would start to be, how can we share that data? For other countries with very low penetration, we needed to look at who has this data, are they available, etc. So again, why do we need this data? It's because with the data, you will understand much more. You'll be more aware of which areas are exposed, etc. So that will give the municipalities and cities much better understanding, awareness, and make better decisions for climate adaptation and also preventive measures like disaster risk reduction, which is sort of linked together.
Okay. So let me pick up and build on the context that Mia provided and tell you a little bit about the process that we followed in order to analyze the barriers the set of barriers that Mia was just talking about. So I came into the process with a very behavioral perspective, and the process that we followed was to review the knowledge bank case, which is in the context of what we're trying to do, the North Star, the most advanced best practice that we have, and really look at what are the factors that shaped and facilitated or blocked the process that was underlying the change that led to the establishment of the knowledge bank. And the idea was to look at the case and then based on patterns or key findings that we established based on this analysis, to propose an analytical framework, an approach that would help us then map barriers and drivers when we look at the case studies that we have in the Soteria project. And then, of course, as a third step, we would use the framework in order to see whether it works and whether we are able to consistently identify or evaluate the same set of barriers and drivers across the different cases. So in the deliverable specifically, we focused on 3 case studies in order to test. We started reviewing and reading all of the materials and having these conversations with with Mia. One of the things that really stood out. Of course, this is a complex and lengthy process that unfolded. But the barriers and the process of overcoming them, to a large extent, had much to do with intangible and behavioral categories, such as different perceptions for who owns the data and what space it belongs to. We would often find ourselves discussing fear of competitive advantage, especially as Mia was presenting or talking about the positions and the points of view of insurance companies. We would often talk about mistrust and distrust and misperception, lack of awareness, incomplete picture of what are actually the societal costs of non-action. And then, of course, the classical behavioral resistance to change, which is something that all of us are dealing with in the context of climate adaptation, as we're looking at very complex transitions and adoptions of new models. So as we began identifying these intangible factors, it became very evident that we need to figure out a way to systematically map and understand this less tangible set of barriers alongside with the tangible barriers, which we, of course, all of us understand are super important, and they're unquestionably part of the process. So it wasn't surprising that these things are coming out, because of course, when you take this more human-centered perspective, you understand that the transition that's involved in adopting new models to managing climate risk and loss data in this case involves much behavior change, and it depends on adopting shared mental models. So it wasn't that much about the data itself, which was the core subject, but it was the alignment of these mental models that was needed, so that stakeholders, the different stakeholders, would hold the same narratives about risk, about responsibilities, so that they could coordinate effectively. Of course, part of what we were talking about, and that applies also to other aspects of climate adaptation, involves dynamics between different actors. And it's those dynamics that ultimately determine whether the formal mechanisms succeed. Because one of the things, the findings that stood out, or the patterns, was that, yes, of course, many objective barriers needed to be overcome, but there were also areas where there was no objective barriers, and it was a matter of the social dynamics between the institutions or the different units within institutional context that would that needed to communicate in order to activate the mechanisms that were in place. Trust was something that came over and over again. So this was something that that really stood out as a key factor determining whether stakeholders can adopt the new processes and really activate behaviors that would involve sharing data. So it wasn't just the technology and the institutional mechanisms, but that trust factor. And the reality is that one of the key observation was that behavioral barriers and understanding them can be extremely helpful in understanding why in some ways technical solutions exist, but they are underused. And ultimately, the learning that we extracted here was that recognizing these factors is essential, especially when we're looking to design and adopt not only new tools and new solutions, but actually incorporate them into cross-sectoral behaviors involving different stakeholders and different organizations which need to adopt new behaviors. So in that sense, we started looking at, as Mia mentioned, we already knew that we will be using the classical PESTEL analysis, which allows us to look at the objective categories. We'll put them on the screen in a moment, just to refresh everybody's memory on what they are. But we also needed to find a structured approach at capturing the behavioral aspects. So we looked at different models that look at behavior change and the factors and the ingredients that need to be in place in an environment in order to facilitate that change. Some of the models that are out there are too complicated and it would have been a mess to incorporate them. So we kind of landed on the COM model for behavior change, which looks at three main categories. It looks at capability, basically focusing on or trying to understand whether this behavior realistically can be accomplished in principle, given the capabilities and capacities that exist. The second category is opportunity, looking at the broader context and environment, whether there's sufficient contextual opportunity for this to happen. And then, of course, looking at motivation, which is a key driver of behavior. So these, when we put the categories together, we ended up with the following set that you see here, the classical PESTEL analysis, which helped us look at political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal aspects that characterize the context in which we were looking to facilitate, to analyze the likelihood for change, and then the behavior change model. And we slightly adapted that after an analytical process in order to, and using the Norway case as a basis, in order to refine the categories that would go under each of the three components. So under capability, we were looking at two aspects. First, is there sufficient knowledge and skills within the stakeholders that participate in the system to make change happen and to adopt these new behaviors that facilitate proper data management. And then, of course, does the technical infrastructure exist? Because when we are talking about data, that was key. Then the second was the opportunity. As I mentioned, this related to the external environment. So here's where we looked at the regulatory environment and looking at are there any regulatory barriers? Then collaboration mechanisms. Are there formal mechanisms that enable easy exchanges? And of course, the financial mechanisms that would support the execution of these new processes. And then third, motivation. And here we packed into this awareness of benefits. We discovered that the awareness of being very clear on what are the gains that your institution, organization, company extracts from participating in in this new model of managing and contributing to climate risk and loss data management. is very, very important, but also understanding the implications of not doing so, of society not having access to these data. As Mia identified, this is something that's key and a key pillar in the climate adaptation process. Market pressure, given that climate and climate adaptation now is shaping many economic models and influencing business players in different ways. Pressure coming from the market was something that we thought is really, really important and should be included in the analysis. And then reputational considerations. When we talk about changing behavioral patterns on group or societal level, the actions of different stakeholders within that system come with reputational costs or benefits. And so we thought that these sometimes can trigger action for players which might be a little bit conservative or fear engaging with the new models, but because they feel pressured by the changing norms for everybody else, they might step in. So we thought that this is something that's important to account. The way that we visualize this, and I'm sharing here the simplified version of what we put together in order to just highlight the execution, and then you can find the further details in deliverable 2.2. But the idea is that we actually put these categories in one joint matrix. And the way that we did that is the complete matrix would have a question that would relate to each cross combination of categories that would help answer the question as to whether this factor is in place, firmly in place, whether it's so inconsistent, or whether it's completely lacking. And so in the complete document, in each box, we would basically be able to fill in verbally our observations or information that we have in order to answer the specific category. But the simplified version, which you see here, uses a legend that allows us to evaluate on a very simple three-level system, the level of readiness with the respective combination, accounting for the behavioral and the PESTEL dimension. So if you have two filled dots, then it's a solid factor. If we have one filled and one empty, this is an inconsistent, so the process is in place, or some of the elements are in place, but it's not consistently resolved. And then we have two empty dots when the respective category still needs work. So the full matrix involves all three dimensions of the combi model. This is on capability, covering knowledge and technical infrastructure. You see opportunity, which involves regulatory environment, collaboration, and financials. And then motivation, which covers awareness, pressure from the market, and reputation. So you see that in every box we've marked our evaluation of how this category performs in the respective case. So we developed the matrix using the knowledge from the knowledge bank in Norway, but then we actually went ahead and applied in order to test its applicability on three cases, three of our Soteria cases, and you can see the results in the deliverable. But that really helped us consistently look at the same set of factors and look at the mix of behavioral and tangible factors that were in place. So with the remaining minutes, I want to actually use a more dialogue format and extract the knowledge that Mia has on the knowledge bank, which was the basis for some of the insights that led to the development of the matrix, in order to highlight the relevance of using a systematic tool that allows us to analyze behavioral drivers. So the first The first thing is just to reinforce the importance of behavioral factors. Referring back to your experience with the knowledge bank, you very often in our dialogue talk about the fact that there were, of course, tangible factors, but also explain that much of the reason much of the resolution needed to be directed at intangible factors such as lack of trust or fear of losing competitive advantage. So what would you say were the main behavioral drivers that unlocked the process in the knowledge bank case?
Okay, as you know, this is a long story. It started in 2010 when I was initiating and leading the climate issues from the insurance side. So the first thing was to say, to talk with my board, which is all the CEOs of the insurance companies, and they wanted to understand what is at risk on our side, what is the insurance problems that we can face with the climate change. I was also part of the banks, because banks were also in the association. They had no idea. They were not interested at that time. And then I think which is very important here is that we have in Norway, and this is more or less the same in Spain and in France, is that the natural catastrophe cover for insurance is automatically part of the property insurance. And that means that for many, many years, there's a lot of insurance data that is collected from the insurance company to this association. But what we saw is that more and more flash flood made a huge problem in cities, because they were flooded in the cities and they didn't know, where to change the sewage or water pipe or do something with the infrastructure. So anyway, I think the fact that I just had a mandate, but we didn't know where to start. So I started by looking at which institution in Norway are responsible for what. And this is actually law-based, because they said that the Agency of Civil Protection are doing this and the Climate Adaptation are doing this. So I just decided that to make these people into a room, and I was lucky enough to meet the right people, and they talk to each other, and you just have to make them understand that it's all in it for them. So you have to present, to get people involved and motivated to even just to meet each other. Then there was a big conflict between the insurance sector and the municipalities, because they were fighting they were disagreeing on who was at blame for all these rise in cost and damages from particular flash floods. And so I think just very slowly talking to, I have to have many coffees. I have to drink, I usually say, drink a lot of beer, because to build that trust took quite some time. So eventually you need to have a mandate that opens up for finding the right people to talk to start talking to each other. And I think that was the first thing, just that come across that conflict that had built up between the municipalities and the insurance sector, to try to tell even my people at the communication part, don't be aggressive and say they are blame for everything. So I'm trying to build up some sort of trust here. So please give me that possibility. So that was the first thing, just, bring people to the table.
Okay. Great. I'm looking at the time, so I'd love to jump on to the third question, actually, because I think it's interesting and it's very relevant here. And it's you in our conversation say that a huge journey was completed, but there's still some hiccups in utilizing the knowledge bank that is already in place. And that is the most, as I said, the North Star in terms of best practice. What are the main difficulties that right now exist in utilizing this mechanism effectively? given that it already is in place and it's the most advanced model that exists in terms of data.
Okay, so just so you know that the hardest part is to convince the insurance sector to give away their granular data on address level, because they are protected by law and they personal law and other things, and it's very business sensitivity. So I think that's being part of also Insurance Europe and talking about this with other insurance sector in Europe. They said this is not possible. So that was the biggest hinder. Okay, and then then the technical, we tested the data, the value of it with 10 municipalities. There's a long process here. And then finally, the money came on the table to say that the Civil Protection Agency would set up this national data hub or bank. Today, it's still many municipalities that municipalities can get the data on address level. Not everybody, just the municipalities and the flood agency, because they are using them to map and to collaborate their models. But today we have that since 2020. We also needed to make a new law or part of a new law to make this happen. You have to bring awareness to the municipalities that the data are there. The National Data Knowledge Bank has now lack of money to continue. There's still a lot of work to make this work, because to import insurance loss data into each municipality model, like a GIS, like a geoinformatics system, is very technical and can be difficult, and you need an expert. So I think this is just a start. But of course, I think the main factor to bring people together, to convince them what's in it for you. How will the insurance gain by giving this data to the municipalities so they can make better decisions and actually use the data? That is important. If they don't use the data, they will be sued by the insurance companies because they have to use the most upgraded information.
Thank you. So what I want to share is just a few key takeaways and then open this for questions if there are any. But in essence, the idea here was, and the reason that we wanted to share this as a tool that we put together and utilized experimentally, was that we realized that, of course, climate adaptation in general terms, whether we are dealing with data or with other aspects, involves new decision making, new patterns of collaboration between different entities with very different roles and institutions, new norms of behavior, and in this case involving transparency and sharing information, and overall new patterns within one system. These inherently are behavioral tasks and categories. And very often they create the challenges, make legal and technological enablers when they're in place not work effectively. So in that sense, we thought that it is helpful, and we need to continue thinking in the direction of utilizing tools and analytical frameworks that also consider that these behavioral categories, so that when we facilitate these more complex processes, we can take care of the legal, the regulatory, the institutional aspects, but we can also alongside work on the trust, on the awareness, and all of these things that Mia identified, especially in this last discussion. So just as a key takeaway, for climate adaptation systems, which we're looking to accelerate given the rising need, we see that behavior and the behavior of the actors within the system can often be the glue between the objective elements such as laws, institutional setups, and economic mechanisms. So we do need to employ tools that allow us to understand these behavioral factors and forces, so that then we are better positioned in order to address and influence the drivers and barriers that underlie these processes. So with this, I will stop and then open this up for questions, hoping that we have presented you with something that is worthwhile.
Thank you very much, Milena.
I can just add that be aware that this Norwegian case is different than if you have a mandate, if there's an institution or a government who says we will do this. So now I think we are somewhere more advanced in how to work with climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction.
Thank you. So maybe we can take some questions. We have 20 minutes. So it's time to ask a question.
I had a question, of course. I think your message was really good, and I think, as always, I'm convinced of this importance of the behavioral barriers on changing, but also the limitations. I think these barriers all come down really to which people are in which place and which institution and what mandate does the institution have. And so I think there is a really like a high limitation on what influence we have on these barriers. How can you influence that? Like, for example, we are now in contact with someone from the government, but he said, after December, I'm not there anymore. There will be a new person. Who knows who this person, or how you have to start building again a relationship. And yeah, so I think it's a very good idea to tackle this and have it in mind, but it's very hard, I think, there's a big limitation on how far you can.
Great observation, Maria. I completely agree. I think just the ability to understand that right now bottlenecks are individuals and we depend on their personality in itself is an indication that if we want to move to more to systems that are more relevant to the climate reality in which our societies live, we need to utilize new mechanisms or to incorporate new mechanisms that are going to make individuals neutral as contributors to the process. So yes, I agree that in the specific context of our project, we might not be able to influence this or that institution, but our ability to formulate that the personality or the behavior of an individual turns into a bottleneck means that we can make recommendations about, just as Mia said, when you have a mandate, we stop depending on the individual and their inclination to act and so on. So the realization and the ability to say we need a formal mechanism and embedding in the mandate is already, or incentive mechanisms or whatever, is something that, because ultimately we are trying to understand better and to recommend new ways of tackling this. So outside of the immediate context.
Yeah, I can just add that to make a strong mandate is also a behavioral part, because you have to convince somebody. And I think in my case, it was sort of easier because I had access to the board of the insurance, all the insurance company, the CEOs. But when I talked to the municipalities and the national agencies, then you had to make sure that they create their mandate and it was anchored at the top. Because people are going in and out, but if you have like a climate strategy, which many municipalities has, there's usually no funding following. So for example, with the cost of loss, which is with the insurance, the Oslo municipality managed to bring that up to the politicians and the board to see the cost, so that they could, convince them to put money on the table to do this project, for example. So I think the anchoring with the right top management is an absolutely must to make it last over time.
Yeah, I think it's an important message also maybe for the last things we do in Soteria is to try to involve in the final stage also these high top or the people in the top, because to do some kind of legacy of the work that's been done.
May I ask a question? I'm trying, but I couldn't.
Go on, go on.
No, I just wanted to follow up on what Maria was saying, because like I agree with most of it, but I think that like, yes, for the top people to make a decision, but like the top people, at least in Spain, are the ones that change politically. What you need, from my perspective, is like a solid group of people and technicians that believe on something, and that, as Milena said, have the same narrative. And that's the difficult part, right? Like that for us to understand what are we facing. And at least in the Valencian case study, that has been the challenge, to understand as a group together what we are facing. And then, like, the politicians will change and the heads of the Generalitat and whoever will change. But if we remain with something like in the same point of view of what we aim to do or change and what is a need, then it's a slowly process, but it will come.
Absolutely. And the fact that we realize that is the first step and part of what we are doing.
The mandate is actually there if you look at the EU strategy for climate adaptation, it's there. If you look at Sendai framework, it's there. It's from OECD. They've been talking about how you need to put the Paris Agreement and the Sendai framework together, and so the mandate is there. So it's more like who should start the whole process, and how do you pick the right people from the right organization. But it's just a start, and then you could change it over time. But you need it's consistency, and you need a lot of patience, and you need a very good culture and setting for talking to each other, so that each of them understand, and like it took some time to get to know each other. Then it started to feel trust between, and then people are opening up and are more motivated. So, and then on top, of course, they need to anchor their decisions back into their institution.
So I think like, how did you complete the matrix? What resources did you use to complete the matrix so you use it for the 3 case study?
Yes.
And then so you use for the adaptation, so sharing data, if I understood correctly. And do you think you can apply this for other adaptation solution beyond data sharing adaptation?
So in this case, because we already had so much information within the project, we used the story maps, and of course the case study leaders were involved. So the information and the knowledge was already in the team. And it was relatively easy. If we take that and were to use it in a completely new context where you don't have that much of the information, it would probably involve collecting information through secondary research, basically studying and researching what you can find through those, and then primary data collection, interviews with institutions or with stakeholders in order to understand, especially to understand some of the behavioral factors that are in place. So in a normal setting, you will have to go and collect the data, but you have the categories in which to follow. And then to address the second part, we absolutely think that this was one of the reasons why we wanted to share, because what we identified in these final key takeaways that relates to climate adaptation in general, our societies and economies need to adapt very quickly on different levels. And that means that there's going to be a fair amount of similar behavior change involved that we somehow need to facilitate. So using a tool that helps us map that out could be helpful and applicable, with of course the note that maybe as we continue to use it, it will get refined and adapted and changed. This was kind of a first experimental.
Thank you. And just another question. So you have done this for Gabro in Valencia. What are the main behavioral barrier for sharing data for these two case studies?
Valencia and Gabrova is very different. Gabrova is with Bulgaria and Valencia is in Spain. And they have very different, when it comes to, for example, insurance loss data, they are very different because setups and the culture is very different. But this is more... for the barrier, I think it was more or less the same, but you have to check with Milena if you can see a big difference. But what also I want to mention is that when we looked at what does it take otherwise for adaptation, climate adaptation to happen, actions, was that some of the region had a plan, but they had no money funding following, and they didn't have resources. The lack of expertise to use the data, and they didn't have the data. So that was sort of the overall in the regions. And when it comes to exactly the difference in this behavior part, I think Milena, you need to.
What was quite interesting was that when we started analyzing the different cases, we actually established that some of the more complex and tangible barriers, especially in Gabrovo, were not that problematic, including because you have there, we kind of had a dense ecosystem with the mayor, who was very open-minded and proactive, heading that. So just having the discussions in order to really understand and dive deeper into the context helped us establish that it was much less the objective or tangible factors such as legal mechanisms or mandates or even technology, but it was more awareness on the new value that the information and the data that different entities had. So they just didn't realize how much value that has on societal level in the new climate reality, because they were just using it for something else. So that level of awareness was really important, especially for institutions which by default play the role of protecting social interests. So giving them the awareness that they actually have an even bigger role was something that really influenced their readiness. So in that sense, even though when you look at the analysis, you would categorize Gabrovo as sort of an early stage context, Valencia as a more developed, and then Trøndelag as the more advanced institutional and general context. You would see that some of the barriers were easier to overcome in Gabrovo, but we already knew what to look for and what we needed to overcome, and that in a very systematic way. And so that was extremely helpful, and helped us really move forward.
Thank you. And Camilla?
Yeah, I just wanted to give one example about Gabro, speaking about skills and knowledge and interactions. We, for example, realized that there is information, and the people who deal with this information are well advanced in their knowledge and skills, but there is no mechanism for the communication between the different institutions. There is no real platform for communicating and exchanging this information. And in this sense, the exercise with the establishment of a regional data hub is something very helpful. And Gabrovo, the municipality of Gabrovo, of course, will take this forward also beyond the project.
I can just add that the whole pilot project and then what we needed and ending up with a national data bank was actually driven by the engineers in the municipalities, because they have to do the risk assessment. They have to understand. They were out in the field seeing all the water, and they said, Mia, can you please help us get these insurance loss data? How can we, how can we do that? And of course, we started with the pilot to just because the insurance sector, well, they should have their own data, and they didn't. So I think it was easy to find some some motivated people within the engineers to make the risk assessment, and also be aware that to make a risk assessment is part and it's obligation in the flood directive, but that was a driver. And I know that many countries do not have that in their national in the laws, but if it was still a very bottom-up project, starting with the people who was motivated. And then, but with the land use planners in the same municipalities, they were not interested. It took a long time to get them interested.
Thank you very much. I think we do not have time for more questions. So thank you for the presentation, the question. And just I wanted to say that the next community of practice will be the 17th of December. There will be, we will have the presentation of Marina Lehmann and Maria de Vries. So two presentations of the level 3.4 and 3.7. So policy recommendation on sustainable insurance and guidance on insurance pricing, product and services. I will send you the invitation soon with the title and everything. And that's it. Thank you very much again, and see you all soon.